The Mega Evolution set shook things quite a bit in the Pokemon TCG. Most of the decks got something to boost them, and so in today's video we are going to take a look at what I think are the top 10 decks based on results now that we have a ton of tournaments that have taken place in the Mega Evolution format. Starting things off at number 10 we have Ceruledge. Ceruledge EX is a very straightforward card. It just tries to do a lot of damage by discarding a lot of energy throughout the course of the game, and of course the Lunatone and Zoroark pairing were the perfect match for this deck, being able to draw extra cards with Lunar Cycle, get more energy in the discard pile, and have Zoroark as a powerful secondary single prize attacker to back up Ceruledge in the early game or at any given moment throughout the game. Outside of that, the deck is very straightforward. You get very explosive turn 1s with Carmine, Squawkabilly, and Lunatone draw, and after that it's just finding the right energy to attack with Ceruledge and targeting the right Pokemon. Now, this linear strategy can be a problem many times because your opponent knows exactly what to expect from you, so they are able to prepare accordingly. However, the deck can be so powerful and apply so much pressure so quickly that sometimes, even though you have one trick and one trick only, and your opponent knows exactly what is coming their way, there's very little they can do to stop it, especially if the deck can be hit with variants because of the early discards, right? Carmine and Squawkabilly are very destructive cards in the beginning, and we also have Earthen Vessel and Ultra Ball, which continue to discard resources as well. But if your Palpad and your Boss's Order survive the early game and you have enough cost to make sure that you are pressuring the right Pokemon, this deck can just overwhelm just by being a solid, powerful Pokemon that can 1-hit KO anything, even the high HP Mega Pokemon like Lucario or Mega Gardevoir, for example. None of them can stand in Ceruledge EX's way, especially if they have a very strong start and they get a lot of energy in the discard pile. The deck just ends up dishing too much damage too quickly, and a lot of decks have a hard time overcoming this. Of course, any decks that apply pressure to the bench as well as the active, which Gardevoir and Dragapult excel at, can deal with this quite effectively, sometimes even denying a Ceruledge completely. And of course, Tera Box denying Charge Cadets and pressuring those two can also be very impactful. So the deck has very clear weaknesses. The deck has one strategy and one strategy only, but when it runs well, it is very good at it. Coming in at number 9, we have the Eeveelutions deck. Now, this weekend at Gdansk, we saw Emma Hagen bring this deck all the way to the finals, ended up going down to Gholdengo in what you would honestly think it's a pretty good matchup for the deck, but she was unfortunately drawing pretty bad in the third game of the round. Now, outside of that, Eeveelutions has been on a growing uptrend since Mega Evolutions hit. The deck didn't gain anything exclusive in terms of cards, right? It doesn't run, at least Emma's list doesn't run a single Mega Evolution card that I remember, and as we are seeing on screen, it doesn't. However, the deck is super versatile, right? And it seems like Emma has finally cracked the code in terms of getting a very solid 60, which is extremely versatile. You can see there's so many singles in this list specifically, and that's what you can expect from many Eeveelutions. Now, historically, they were not including Pidgeot, but of course, Pidgeot's Quick Search is extremely powerful and extremely essential, especially in the late game, and making your opponent target down Pidgeot means your Hoot-Hoots tend to survive, right? Whereas if sometimes your opponent only has to worry about targeting the Hoot-Hoots, then that can be a problem for your own survivability, and of course that impacts the overall success rate and consistency of this deck. But when you have such a powerful combination of attacks and typing with Flareon EX and its fire typing for Gholdengo and any grass Pokemon you encounter, when you have Leafeon for all the dark type Pokemon that have appeared in the metagame in order to try to counter Gardevoir, and then Leafeon just demolishes all of them pretty single-handedly, and then you have Bloodmoon Saluna as a powerful backup attacker, and you have Terapagos and of course Wellspring Ogerpon to be able to pressure two of your opponent's Pokemon at any given moment. So the deck has a very nice variety of attackers. It is surprising that it doesn't have any sort of Dragapult tech, essentially Lily's Clefairy X, to be able to deal with it. It does mean the deck gets a lot more simplified, and you're able to play things like Jet Energy to counter all the strapping strategies that we have seen overall. And Flareon EX's Carnelian 280 damage attack cannot be underestimated. That is a lot of damage, and when combined with Black Belt's training, that can actually hit for a lot of damage. As well as the Gravity Mountain means Flareon can actually take down a lot of the stage 2 Pokemon EX, and it can also take down a lot of the Mega Pokemon. So The deck is very well rounded, it had a lot of success, it also got top 8s and top 16s across the past couple of weekends, so I do think this deck is on the rise, but it's definitely not an easy one to play. At number 8 we have the Mega Absol box deck. After Tord Reklev essentially broke the metagame and surprised everyone at Milwaukee with his deck, with his masterclass, with his posts, and this deck took the metagame by storm. Afterwards, it did fizzle down a little bit, but it has still managed to find some good results, and it is still doing pretty well. Now, the combination of these two powerful Mega Pokemon has a lot of merit. Mega Kangaskhan offers an alternate typing to Mega Absol and offers that very nice run errand ability for extra cards. You have the trapping capabilities of Yveltal. It does seem like the deck has completely phased out Cornerstone Ogerpon, essentially not respecting Gholdengo at all, which in part was what led to Gholdengo doing so well this past weekend, but overall the deck is very disruptive, has Yveltal to trap. Some players chose to run 0-6 Machinations, others chose to use Airy in trying to, that was the way to try to counter Gholdengo, attacking their hand, limiting their resources. I do think Airy is probably a lot more powerful in that regard, because you can just immediately discard the 2 superior energy retrievals, whereas with 0-6 you can limit the amount of cards they have available to them for the next turn, but if they just keep their superior energy retrievals, they will still have a lot of abilities to draw extra cards and be able to find enough resources to discard, right? Now with Enhanced Hammer for the mirror matches and other special energy cards, overall the deck is very powerful, very good. However, it definitely fell off after it had that explosive weekend where the surprise factor was no longer in its favor and it had to take a backseat, and a lot of players were a lot more prepared for it than in that first weekend of Mega Evolution. So I think that explains why this deck essentially stabilized. It's not the tier S deck that I generally thought it would be after the display we saw in Milwaukee and Belo Horizonte doing so well at both tournaments at the same time with very little representation, but a very good conversion rate and it almost winning the event. However, this deck is definitely a powerful one. It's not to the power level of Dragapult or Gardevoir it seems, but it is definitely a top 10 deck for sure. And at number 7 we have Marnie's Grimmsnarl EX, which actually has been doing a lot better in the Mega Evolutions format as opposed to the previous one where it did well at NAIC, that it completely flopped Worlds. It didn't do well in Pittsburgh, but since Mega Evolutions, and I think it's all down to this one-off inclusion, Yveltal, that card has definitely made a huge impact. Well, and of course, Lily's Determination, right? Lily's Determination added a lot of consistency to this deck. This deck spreading strategy is very appealing to a lot of good players, so I think it makes sense that this deck is doing quite well overall. Damage spread, devolution punishes a lot of decks that go wide, that evolve. A lot of decks have abilities, of course, so Frostless's Freezing Shout is a very powerful strategy against them. And Yveltal opening up this clutch attack, this defensive strategy, having something trapped in the active, definitely makes a world of difference. Now, there are a lot of Professor Turos going around. There's Jet Energies in some decks like Ceruledge. Professor Tour is definitely on the rise. However, that clutch Yveltal combined with an Iono and a well-timed counter catcher cannot be underestimated. That can mean a lot of turns of Freezing Shroud damage just building up on top of Adrena Brain damage being flung onto your side of the board. So this deck has been very appealing and we have seen it perform really well with top 16s, top 8s and top 4s, and I think it's only a matter of time before Marnie's Grimmsnarl is able to win a tournament. Now, Marnie's Grimmsnarl is definitely carried by Monkey Dory and Frostless. I think that's almost its own deck in a way, and Marnie's Grimmsnarl solidifies the deck and giving it a high HP powerful attacker that does that extra burst of damage, something like Bloodrunner's Haluna, in a way, of course, a lot sturdier, but the main strategy of Frostless with Monkey Dory cannot be underestimated, and it is just incredibly powerful. So Marnie's Grimmsnarl coming in at 7th place, and of course the dark type weakness always is a welcome thing when we are in such a Gardevoir dominated metagame. And at number 6 we have Tera box. In a similar vein as Eeveelutions, this deck relies on the Noctowl engine, applies early pressure with Wellspring Ogerpon, though a lot more reliant on that compared to Eevee box, and then it has Ogerpon, it has Pikachu EX for its big attacker, it has Terapagos, it has Lily's Clefairy, it has Iron Leaves, and lately it has been playing Mega Mobile as a way to have a powerful late game attacker whilst also having the possibility to huge bite opponents Gholdengo EXs for a single 1 KO, which was not usually the norm. Now of course, those 3 prizes are very scary to be giving up, but if you're on a 2-2 prize map, then 2-2-3 or those 3 prizes usually don't end up mattering too much. Now the deck is versatile, it's very powerful, it's very aggressive, but it's very reliant on Crispin, and it can be caught off guard, or one of its main weaknesses is usually being left energyless on the board and being hit by an Iono and not drawing an out to a Noctowl. Usually it's hard for this deck to maintain a powerful threat on the board, Wellspring Ogerpon returns the energy with Torrential Pump, Pikachu EX discards the energy with Topaz Bolt, and Terapagos and Teal Mask Ogerpon are of course good threats, but I don't think they're powerful enough to threaten too many decks, especially Ogerpon, unless you are heading for weakness. So the deck is very versatile, it's very powerful, it has very explosive starts, but as the game whittles down, it does tend to fall apart. And now that we are having these big Mega Pokemon EX get upwards of 300 HP with Lively Stadium, with Bravery Charm and whatnot, I think this deck really needs to play either a Tool Scrapper or a Jamming Tower, which goes against your own A-Spec, but you need something of the sort to be able to keep those HPs in check and in range of Pikachu EX. But overall, this deck has been doing pretty well as well, historically and now since the World Championships, and that is why it is ranked at the number 6 spot. In the number 5 spot, we have Charizard EX. Now, Charizard has continually been doing well. It won one of the first Mega Evolution format tournaments in Milwaukee. Jackson Ford was able to do it with a combination of Charizard, Dusknoir, and Pidgeot, the classic combination, and thanks to Klefki and Jet Energy being able to activate your own Dusknoir by shutting down your opponent's Psyduck's damp ability, this deck has been continually doing better and better as the format has advanced. It is still doing well. That high HP of Charizard EX, the dark typing, does really well against Gardevoir, and as the game progresses, its damage just keeps on getting more powerful. And so that allows the deck to 1 KO a lot of the Mega Pokemon and pretty much any threat overall. Now, usually Max Belt is the A-Spec of choice for this deck. However, we have seen a bit of a trend towards Secret Box for that extra little bit of consistency, being able to find your rare candy, being able to find the follow-up supporter, being able to find a Stadium Guaranteed. Is just a very nice card to have, and it really helps the deck set up in many situations where it normally wouldn't. So whether you prefer the extra damage of Max Belt like Jackson Ford did, or whether you prefer the Secret Box like Hermione did this weekend and in Lille, where he got back-to-back top 8s with essentially the same 60 card deck list of Charizard. No matter what, Charizard is a very powerful Pokemon. It is getting its resurgence with the Mega Evolution format, and it seems like even though it's rotating in April, Charizard still has a lot of fire under its tail. Now, coming in at number 4, and probably my most controversial choice that a lot of people will question, is N's Zoroark EX. Now, this deck hasn't gotten to a finals yet since Pittsburgh, I believe. However, it is consistently a deck that is being chosen by some of the best players in the world. It is continually doing well, continually adapting, and that tradability is just incredible, right? So I do think the deck has been figured out quite a bit. Overall, it's very stable. Its engine, clearly the Cyrano engine, seems to be the way to go moving forward. In any metagame, that seems to be the best way to set up Zoroark. Thin the deck, you get multiple Zoroarks, and you get extra pieces to discard or extra Pokemon to search for, such as Vesandipity and Petrant. And now that the deck has some more control-y possibilities, such as the Yveltal plus Petrant EX combo, like before, sometimes the deck ran Maractus. Even with Yveltal, you can trap things, but if you're not self-generating damage on your board, then that clutch damage is not as impactful. However, when you have Yveltal and when you have Petrant down, and you can trap something that is safe with Yveltal, but also you are self-damaging and you can Monkey Dory Adrenabrain that damage to your opponent's side of the field, that's when that strategy gets very scary overall. And then we have Hero Escape to make Zoroark EX just have 380 HP, not an easy number for a lot of decks to hit. And if that Zoroark EX gets hit at all, then Powerful Rage becomes a very, very threatening attack. And if your opponent doesn't want to attack into the Powerful Rage, then they are forced to have a ghosting effect every single turn. And very few decks are able to do that, so eventually they will hit into a Zoroark, while Zoroark very happily plays around and also uses Boss's Orders or Counter Catcher to their advantage, and thanks to Bulkpad, usually they can have more Boss's Orders. That allows for the deck to play in a very controlly way, if you will. So Zoroark, the deck is evolving. It's no surprise that the trade ability is getting better and better. And no, this deck, it did win the first regionals of the season in Pittsburgh. It hasn't won or got into the finals in the Mega Evolution format, but we still have 3 tournaments to go: Las Vegas, Buenos Aires, and LAIC, and I really expect to see this deck still at the top, still getting top 8, and possibly winning one of those 3 events. Then at number 3 we have Gholdengo combined with Solrock and Lunatone. There has been a lot of discussion on which pair for Gholdengo is better, whether it's the Joltik package, whether you're better off just running Energy Surge Pro and playing the deck as normally with multiple various basic energy and just having the baby Gholdengo. But I think after this weekend, it's very clear that Gholdengo combined with Lunatone Solrock is the way to go now. Gholdengo seems to be in a weird, cyclical. Now, Gholdengo seems to be stuck in a weird cycle right now, where if Gholdengo is doing very good, a lot of decks just start teching double Cornerstone into their deck or have an attacking Cornerstone, such as we saw in the first weekend of Mega Absol box, and the deck struggles to do well. However, if people are not respecting Gholdengo and people are teching for Cornerstone and Cornerstone just doesn't appear, as we saw in Gdansk this weekend, then Gholdengo can have a very good run. Doesn't need to go out of its way to really tech for Cornerstone, as we saw the Gdansk winner only had a copy of Mega Mobile EX, but didn't have Turbo Energize, as we saw the previous weekend, in order to power it up faster. Didn't have the 1/1 Mega Lucario, which can be unreliable, and their Rioli on the bench can easily be picked up. So as sort of passive counter to Cornerstone not dedicating too many resources, and after that, if your opponent doesn't have Cornerstone, then as long as you don't start the Mega Mobile, you're not losing much, right? That's the main thing. So Gholdengo, one hit KOing everything. It's very similar to Ceruledge, right? However, it is less weak to Iono, and I think that's the main selling point. You always have the coin bonus abilities to recover after an Iono, and even though you have to rely on superior energy retrieval to find the right amount of energy to be able to take knockouts, that's usually not a problem for this deck. And of course, this deck, thanks to Arven and thanks to our balloon, you are able to attack with Solrock on turn 1 without having to evolve or having a 2-prizer a lot easier than something like Ceruledge, right? So I would say Ceruledge and Gholdengo are very comparable in that they have a singular game plan, but they do it very well. However, Gholdengo's anti-Iono and anti-disruption capabilities just put it that on the next level compared to Ceruledge. Now, I think after Gholdengo 1, at whatever next event you're going to, there's going to be more Toadscroll and there's going to be more Cornerstone. So perhaps Gholdengo won't do well again, and we're going to be in the cycle where once the counters go down, then Gholdengo does better, and once Gholdengo does better, the counters come back, and then Gholdengo sucks. Coming in at number 2, we have Dragapult Dusknoir. Now this deck is very powerful. Historically, it has been very dominant, and historically, it has always fallen short to Gardevoir. However, we did see in the Lille tournament that Gardevoir flopped. Why? Because we're in this weird spot where Psyduck got released, Dragapult didn't do well over in the first weekend of Mega Evolutions format, and Gardevoir dominated, right? And the Gardevoirs there were not respecting Dragapult at all because of the existence of Psyduck, and therefore they weren't even playing Technical Machine Evolution, or the focus on the deck was no longer there, and they were very weak to Buddy. And then what happened next weekend? Because Dragapult didn't do well, many people were just not playing Psyduck in their deck, and that led to Dragapult doing extremely well. And also because the Gardevoirs got greedy and they were very Buddy weak, then that allowed Dragapult to really excel and dominate over in Lille. Now, the deck is just very strong, Phantom Dive is an amazingly powerful attack. It does seem like the deck is pretty much figured out. The only question left is really like, do you play 2 Hilda, 2 Jack, or 1 of each in order to increase the consistency of the deck? I personally favor Hilda just because finding Neo Opera energy at the crucial moment I think is extremely important and too valuable not to have the option, right? Every Hilda you play is an extra out to that very crucial Neo Opera energy, so in exchange of 1 less evolution, I think it's a worthy trade-off. But overall, the deck and the deck's potential to just take down multiple Pokemon at once, thanks to Curse Blast, thanks to Flying Entry, and thanks to damage counters from Phantom Dive, and even on top of Adrenabrain, whilst controlling the early game and slowing things down through Body, I think is not to be underestimated. So I really do think this deck is extremely powerful, and I would not be surprised to see it continue to do well for many years to come. However, coming in at the number 1 spot is Gardevoir. This deck has not won more than 1 event in the Mega Evolution format. It did win in Belo Horizonte, got 2nd in Milwaukee, but the rise of dark decks, Mega Absol box, Charizard, Grimmsnarl, all of them doing so well. Gholdengo also doing quite well, which has historically been problematic for Gardevoir. And now Gardevoir has to decide between running Drifloon for those high HP dark type Pokemon that it needs to deal with, or Jellicent in order to slow down item cards, have a better chance in the mirror match and against Gholdengo, but makes itself so much weaker against all the dark type Pokemon because Jellicent just gets taken down too easily and his damage output is not good enough against those decks. So Gardevoir is in a little bit of trouble right now. It is still doing well. It is still one of the most popular decks in the format, and I do think it's definitely the number 1 deck. Why? Because if it wasn't the number 1 deck, we wouldn't see all these dark type decks trying to counter it, right? So just because it has not won more than 1 event so far in the Mega Evolution format doesn't mean it is not the number 1 deck. Actually, I would say because it is the number 1 deck and it is trying to be hard countered as much as possible by most of the player base, especially some of the best players, they're trying to not play Gardevoir mirror matches all day, and they are trying to give themselves an advantage and find decks that can do well against the metagame, take some hard losses perhaps, but have a very good Gardevoir matchup where if they face average players playing Gardevoir, they know they're gonna dominate them, and if they're playing one of the best players in the world playing Gardevoir themselves, then they will have a natural advantage just based on the deck they have chosen, and that's why Grimmsnarl, Charizard, Mega Absol, and Zoroark have been some of the choices for many of the top players throughout the course of the Mega Evolution format. Now, I do think that Drifloon is a necessity for Gardevoir. Overall, you really need that extra damage output as much as possible in pretty much every circumstance. So I think that's what I would expect from Gardevoir from here on out until we get the next set, and maybe that changes things up. But Gardevoir still the number 1 deck by far, and expect that to continue in the Mega Evolution format. And so that rounds out the top 10 decks in my opinion for the standard format. Yes, I'm sure some decks could be interchangeable. I'm sure you, the viewer, will leave me a lot of good comments in the section down below in terms of why X deck should be ranked higher or X deck should be ranked lower, or why X deck is not in the top 10. But overall, in terms of numbers, in terms of results, these are definitely the top 10 decks. There aren't many others that come close, and it's essentially things like Raging Bolt and things like Crostal or Pidgeot Control maybe trying to get to that 10th place, but overall these are by far the best performing decks so far. So if you really want to make sure that you give yourself the best chance at your next event, choosing any of these 10 decks will probably give you the best chance just based on the deck's raw power alone. But please let me know your thoughts on this top 10 list, and if there's anything else you would add, or if there's anything I missed. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye. ¿Eres de México y necesitas cartas de Pokémon? Busca Hyper Beam Cards en Facebook e Instagram. Y si estás en Tijuana, búscalos en el local G18 y G11 en el centro comercial Otay.